Nice. How are you? Nice to
I'm
meet you.
good. Nice to meet you. It was a little confusion about the time, but we finally connected.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for accommodating my time, and it was like one of these things where I had to figure out: am I going to do this before I go to work, or will I do this
Where are
at work?
you? Where are you?
I'm now in the Hudson Valley.
So you're on the same time as me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where are you?
In New York City.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. No, I left. I moved a little north of the city a little while back, and
You.
you know, and landed here in this radio station. It's a bit of a I'm sure it's like it could be a Frank Capra type of film story,
Small town, big town boy goes to small town.
Yeah, exactly. With big media ideas and has to learn how to be very, um, you know, uh, sort of just be a little bit more listening more than talking and yeah, kind of learn how to do things up here in a new way. But it's been fantastic.
Great.
Yeah.
Was that a COVID move, or had you already done it?
Yeah, well, let's put it this way, Molly. It sped up the plan. How's that?
Okay. Accelerated. Okay. Got
Accelerated, right, the schedule a little bit because I was planning on doing it after my son graduated high school, which would have been this past spring, but it kind of just moved my date up, and it turned out it was a good thing. So everybody adapted. So
good. That's good. Good news.
yeah. How are you and your family, and how have you
Well,
guys?
I'm a family of one, so it's just I'm just surviving. No, I'm doing fine. In fact, I'm the only person I know that hadn't gotten COVID yet.
Wow.
Probably will at some point. Yeah. And I come back into the city. I spend the summer on Long Island, and then I'm back here, and I'm just so glad to be back in the city somehow. I love New York this time of year. So
it's fantastic. And, I have to say the same up here. It's almost like it's as close to paradise as I've seen when you just get up early and if you happen to be driving over the Hudson towards looking at the Catskills, it's kind of, I never take it for granted. I don't know. I think after so many decades of being, but you're probably near Central Park.
I am. And it's funny because the leaves aren't that colorful in New York this year, but I was talking to some people last night and they said it was very colorful upstate New York. And I went to Yaddo about this time last year, and it was the most gorgeous train ride going up along the Hudson. Oh, took your breath away.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's a nice trip, the Hudson line, isn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to move immediately, so good for you.
I'll save a spot for you here. Don't worry. Okay. Whenever you're ready, you just let me know.
Space. Okay.
For sure. We'll get it's not so, I mean, a lot of people came up here. I wasn't the first.
I know. On Long Island too, people went out. Usually there were summer people and they've stayed out there. So it's really a change in people's lives. Yeah.
Yeah. And I went to Bard for a while when I was so I was already very familiar. And then there's actually a nifty film festival I just went to this past week, right in my county, Columbia County, where Peter Biskin.
I know about that. Yeah, it looks like a really good one. Yeah,
it really is. We saw Larry Kardish, too. I'm sure you know well. The two of them founded this festival. I believe they were the founders. And we saw The Whale, the new Darren Aronofsky film, which I don't know if you've had a chance to see that one.
I haven't. You're ahead of me on that one.
Well, I think you'll like it, and even those maybe who roll their eyes a little bit because of the Darren Aronofsky's very stylized manner of making films. But in this one, there's some of that at moments, but it's really his most, I felt, emotionally connective film yet. Maybe because so it's an exciting thing to watch. I think you'll like it.
Good. There are a lot of good movies. I just saw about 10 films at the New York Film Festival, and I sort of selected them ahead of time, but I loved every one of them. I thought they were fantastic, and a lot of great, women directors now are really coming into their own. So that was exciting.
Who comes to mind? I know, of course, you have something of a feminist streak in your.
Well, I do, but I'm not. I'm not going to promote women directors unless they deserve it in my own mind.
Sure.
But like Joanna Hogg is sort of established, but I like her film very much. Mia Hansen-Løve is sort of established, and I loved her film. And there's a Black Senegalese filmmaker, Alice Diop, whose
Yes, I've heard of her.
feature
Sure.
film is Saint Omer. And I looked into some of her others. There's some documentaries she made on Mubi, and she's incredibly talented in this film. A lot of the films have this kind of stealth rhythm where they don't fill you in the beginning.
Yes.
I don't know if it's sort of a female thing. I think it a little bit is. This is kind of withholding information. After Sun is like that too. A beautiful film by this new Scottish woman filmmaker. And, you know, there's just a dozen, and they're also a lot about the sort of what women of ambition have to do, all the disconnect between, say, a woman growing up in Senegal and then going to Paris and being educated in Paris, and what that does to, you know, the sort of divided sensibility of that. Really interesting.
Yeah, and then in terms of like structure of films, you know, there's such a now 100+ years of cinema to lean on, and then most people grow up with so much cinema or storytelling on the screen anyway, that you don't have to necessarily, people kind of figure out where they are a lot faster than they used to.
They do that. Well, they're used to that. They're sort of more comfortable with that kind of ambiguity than they used to be. They don't need to be held by the hand. And that's one of the things I loved about the Alice Diop. She could have made it this sort of polemic, this ideological film, hammering away at the fact that this Black woman couldn't assimilate in Paris, but she doesn't do that. She sort of lets you come to it and see the complexities of it. And there are no real villains in it. You know, that's what's really interesting. And another film like that sort of sneaks up on you is Kelly Reichardt's Showing Up, about an artist somewhere in upstate New York, played by Kelly Richard. And you just don't know, played by Michelle Williams, sorry. And you don't know quite where that's going either. And it becomes a really fascinating study of the sort of both competitiveness and camaraderie among these artists in their working day. Very much a kind of atmosphere, a lot of very atmospheric films, at the Joanna Hogg especially, The Eternal Daughter, in which Tilda Swinton plays both mother and daughter. I was a little apprehensive about that. It sounded a little gimmicky, but she does, it's beautiful. And there again, I was sort of resisting it for a while. It's a ghost story, but you absolutely don't know where you are and what's real and what isn't. And finally, that's what it's all about. How much of the fantasies we have of our parents, because we think, you know, we remember certain things and not others, and we sort of make sort of put things together and according to how we need to do it emotionally, kind of.
Well, a couple of those filmmakers you mentioned have been on this podcast actually over the years. And I believe Kelly shoots around this area, is my guess, where I am, because I know she also, I don't know if she's still teaching at Bard, but she was over the years. She was teaching film up there.
Well, it looks like that area. I mean, it looked to me like that, one of those places where the Times advertises where you want to get to a little village that's not New York, you know, vibrant arts community. So,
yeah, there's a lot of that here, which is the only reason I can live in this area.
Yeah,
because,
well,
you know,
and good coffee too, I presume.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. So just for those like myself who maybe aren't as aware, before we get to the TCM series Reframed, which is kind of what brought us together today, can you just fill me in? When did you find like fifth cinema? When did you first connect more significant way with movies?
Well, I came to New York in the 60s, and I was, as was the case in those days, nobody hired, I mean, Time and Newsweek did not hire women writers. Nobody hired women writers. The only thing you could get if you wanted to write was get into public relations. I mean, people would get into publishing, but there were really menial kinds of jobs. So it was not it was just, we were just on the verge of the women's movement, but it really hadn't emerged yet. So I started with this kind of funny advertising PR and Univac, the computer firm. And then I got the sort of gift of my life, which was through somebody knew somebody at a place called the French Film Office. It was the US arm of the French film industry, and it promoted French films in this country. And I came in, there was just a small office of 4 of us, and I was I was bilingual, so I wrote a newsletter that was sent to the critics about French cinema, and then I would interpret when it was the height of the Nouvelle Vague, when Godard and Truffaut and Chabrol would come, and Jean-Louis Trintignant.
My God, my favorite.
Oh God! And so I would interpret. I remember Trintignant was here, and we wanted to show him whatever was sort of hip at the time, and so we went down to I forget the Village Bar where Janet Joplin was singing. And we sat in the front row, and she was splurting whiskey, and she was absolutely fantastic. And Trintignant's eyeballs were popping. He's formidable. So that was like the best thing. So I was meeting the critics, and I realized that's really what I wanted to do. And
so wait, just to recap.
Yeah.
Just to recap, Molly, you're in a bar with Jean-Louis Trintignant, watching Janis Joplin perform.
Exactly.
Okay, because you seem to kind of take it for granted. Like, okay,
that's all in a day's work, right? They all wanted to go to Harlem too. I don't know how often I did that either, but that was the thing at that time. They wanted to yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it was great. So I met the critics and I read them, and I sort of fell in love with Andrew Sarris's writing. He was at the Village Voice, and he was sort of establishing the auteur theory in this country. And it was just a fantastic time because suddenly American cinema, and especially American cinema, was being taken seriously as an art form. And it was a smaller world. And everybody was seeing and writing the same films, reading the same critics all across the country.
Right.
And there's this sort of conversation going on, sometimes very acerbic, because it was very personal. It's political, but also personal. The films you loved, and you didn't want nobody could sort of trample on your own. They were sort of part of your. It was almost a religious fervor, I think, because I guess my own film love began. Well, I grew up in Richmond, where I just saw the usual Hollywood movies, but there was an art theater, as there was in most cities at the time, and I saw this Henri Georges Clouzot film. Anyway.
Yes, of course. You
saw
Diabolique,
yeah,
which I know had an impact on you. Yeah.
It had a huge impact on me, both as a film and as for the Frenchness of it. So that was one of the things that inspired me to go to France. And when I was in Paris, it happened actually that Andrew Sarris was there at the same time, but we didn't know each other. We didn't meet till 1966. This was 62. And we were sort of probably going to the same films in the same theaters. And, they would show, because of the French love of cinema, they didn't make distinctions between, they embraced the work of Hollywood directors like John Ford and Howard Hawks and Samuel Fuller. And they didn't have this sort of middle-brow snobbery. It was all art to them. And so that's what you would get an education that just sort of covered the waterfront of film genres. And then when I got back, I got the first one job and then the job at the French Film Office. So gradually I sort of was working my way into criticism, and they formed, this was when Bosley Crowther was still reigning at the New York Times. And this huge, I don't think there's ever been such an influential critic, because his taste was completely in alignment with this vast readership. And he was a bit, he was stodgy. He was sort of not, he had been there for, I don't know what, 20 some years. I have the dates, but I can't remember. So, and he was getting old, and new things were coming. And, this famous story about how he sort of missed the boat on Bonnie and Clyde. And anyway, he was eased out. But in the meantime, this group of critics, including Andrew and Pauline Kael at the New Yorker, and the Time, Dick Schickel, Joe Morgenstern, who's still writing now for the Wall Street Journal, Hollis Albert. There was a whole bunch of them formed this National Society of Film Critics. And their idea was to somehow counter the influence of Bosley Crowther by endorsing independent films or foreign films that he would miss the boat on. And they would do this by somehow establishing, they would give the distributor their endorsement. It would appear in an ad or whatever. And I went to the group once with Andrew just to sit in on it.
Sure.
And at that group, they said, we have to vote. You know, we're a real group now, official now. We have to have a chairman. And so they voted in, it was Stanley Kaufman. And Stanley Kaufman said, well, the first thing, my first business is I want to know what Molly Haskell is doing here. You know, because I was the only non-critic. I mean, I had written a review in Cahiers du Cinema in English, and maybe something in a magazine here and there, but I certainly wasn't an established critic. And everybody sort of gasped. And I thought, well, now I really have to become a critic. Fired me up. Anyway, eventually I did become a member of the group and was in it for a while. And it was a site of some stormy meetings and arguments, but it was all exciting and fun. I'm trying to write about it now in a memoir, so I'll save some of it for that.
That's great. We got a little scoop here, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
You're
well,
welcome.
we'll have to have you back on after that.
You were the first. You were the first to hear.
Thank you, Molly. We'll have to have you back on for that.
Well, that's an incentive to get it done. Okay.
Okay, last thing that then I want to ask you, because you brought up Jean-Louis. I always ask people, now I don't always ask them, I'm lying, but I mean to always ask people if you are Catherine Deneuve or Jean Moreau, which camp do you fall under?
Oh, wow. That's a really
as if you have to make a choice.
It's a really tough decision to make. I mean, I guess I'd have to go with Jean Moreau, because one of the ways I got this job at the French Film Office, they had to test my writing. So I didn't know it, but the woman who I succeeded, the reason I got the job was open was because this woman, Helen Scott, who was a great big Brooklyn communist film person, and she was great friends with Francois Truffaut. In fact, when Truffaut came to do the book of him interviewing Hitchcock, Helen was the translator. She was the one that was sat between them, and she was leaving to help Truffaut with his first English language film, Fahrenheit 451.
Fahrenheit 451. Right.
So the job was open. So I had to get it. I had to audition by writing something. They just said, write about some French film. So I wrote about Jules and Jim. I mean, not knowing that anything about the Truffaut connection or anything. So that was, I sort of hit the jackpot on that. And I loved Jean Moreau in that. I have to say, I met them both at different times, and they were both prima donnas in their own way. So I don't have personal affection, but I have tremendous admiration for both of them. Absolutely, for both of them. Right. Yeah.
Nicely put. Nicely. And we're in the same camp there.
Okay, good.
That's the correct answer.
Oh, good.
So
it was a test.
You would have passed either way. That's
right.
Well, so tell me how you got all caught up with TCM then, because this will lead us into this conversation about what they're trying to do.
A long time ago, when I did some programs with Robert Osborne, who I adored, and with him.
R.I.P.
Yeah, so we did, I forget what it was, a series of films you can't miss or something. And I went down to Atlanta, and I think everything was done in Atlanta then.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so we did this series of things, and then that was that. So I hadn't heard from them in years and years and years. So then they called me to do this reframed movies that affected the culture, and it would be movies 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s movies. And I thought, why are they calling me? Now I'm all old and ugly. Why didn't they call me when I still look halfway decent? And then I realized what it was, and I'm perfectly happy with this. It's because I'm old, and that works in two ways. I'm old enough to have seen the films when they came out, and I'm old enough that I can say what I please. I don't have to worry about being canceled, you know. So you know, I've got nothing to lose on that score anymore. So I think that's what played it. I mean, that's my take on what influenced their decision to get me.
Well, you may be, as you, in your own words, old, but you are not elderly. I can say that. And I think there's a big difference in those two terms, in terms of one's state of mind, and just the way you talked about, you know, this generation of filmmakers earlier. You know, it shows a more youthful outlook, you know, so
well, I feel privileged.
Age is just a number, is what the song says.
I think, you know, sometimes I think, oh, because I don't have a lot of energy, and I think, can I really do this? But when they asked me from the Film Society to be on a panel, a wrap up of the films of the festival. So that means seeing a lot of them. And I think, can I really do this? Because I just don't have the energy that I once did. And then I do it. I'm so glad I did it.
Nice.
And I'm so happy to be still in the film world and thinking about it. And of course, I always love seeing older films and sort of rethinking what it meant at the time and what it means now and so forth. So
that's right. And that's what Reframed is trying to do.
Exactly.
They're giving a context to and describing the impact of film. So season 1 was it a while ago? Are you saying that Robert was part of the first season of Reframed, or was that more recently?
I'm not familiar with an earlier version.
Oh, I thought this was the second go round with Reframed.
Maybe it is. I just
okay. Well,
I missed it if it is.
No big deal. And it starts November 5th. And there's 16 films in the series. It says a second year, so maybe.
Oh, well, I'll have to go back.
Okay, focusing on films that shaped our culture, from I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which was from 1932 through very recent. I think the most recent film is from 2005 or six, An Inconvenient Truth. Right? Is that the Al Gore movie? Anyway.
Yeah. Can't remember. I don't remember. The Brokeback Mountain is 2005.
Yes.
Super.
And then the last one is An Inconvenient Truth.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't have that on my list. Okay.
Anyway, spurred funding for climate, or yes, that's so it's all how cinema over the years has impacted the culture, at least here in the States. So that's so were you assigned certain films from those 16? Is that how it works?
Yeah, they selected them and assigned them to the 4 of us.
And so do you know which I guess Brokeback is one of them?
No, it's not. Mine are earlier on. So what I'm doing are Boys in the Band.
Okay, that's a good one.
The China Syndrome, Children of a Lesser God, and Philadelphia.
Oh, they're in a row. So it's a particular. I guess so. I've seen all 4 of those, it turns out.
Good for you. I think they're all pretty familiar, which is good. I mean, people, I think.
Who directed Boys in the Band? That wasn't Sidney Lumet, was it? Who was that?
No, it was William Friedkin. He did a really good job of it too. Yeah.
Of course. I'll have to now say I'll have to it's I for some reason this morning you'd think that I'm still sleeping or something. I've just lost my ability to express myself, but I was going to say I'll have to rephrase. Isn't The Boys in the Band directed by William Friedkin?
No fair. You can't.
Well, given the time, even for him, I mean, I think for a young director, that was pretty, I don't know, brave is the right word, but certainly not.
It was. I mean, it was a really controversial film. It was really, I mean, it's true that Midnight Cowboy had won the Oscar to the shock and surprise of everybody the year before. Yeah. So, I mean, there was a gay character, but still, this was.
Bob Balaban's character in it. But
yeah. But
then I guess repressed Joe Buck was repressed homosexual. At least but it was so much more subtle compared to The Boys in the Band. Every character just about is very flamboyant and.
Well, of course, it came from Mark Crowley's play, which is very theatrical, and Friedkin preserves the theatricality and the acerbic dialogue. That's all insult humor and all that. But I think one of the things about it, I think there's certain things that make controversial or potentially upsetting films acceptable. Is one of them is it's a form that people understand. I mean, first of all, there's this idea of you getting a group of people together and fueling them with liquor, and these truths come out. So that, I mean, you have that in and also
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf too.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and the Albee. And so you have that here, and it's very witty and very sharp. But what's fascinating about it, and I know some gays really like it and some don't, and younger gays maybe don't even get it. I mean, I'll tell you some interesting reactions along that line, but it was really very much of its time, because this was before Stonewall was just happening. It was way pre-AIDS, pre-activism just beginning. You know, they use the word homosexual. The word gay does not appear anywhere in it. That hasn't come into currency yet. So it's really the era of the sort of self-hating homosexual. And that makes us uncomfortable to some extent. We sort of can't, was it really like that? But I think it was for a lot of gays at that time.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So so it was sort of a milestone. And I found a letter to the Times. Rex Reed had done a profile interview with Mort Crowley about the book and the film. And this one, I was even surprised the Times printed it. It was some woman writing how outraged. She hadn't even seen it, of course, and she wouldn't think of going to it, but
But you could still
you can still
remark on it.
denounce it to the heavens, and it's
Yeah.
in really vitriolic language. It was horrible and vile and propaganda and trying to turn young men into homosexuals and so on. So you could see from that, this is the kind of audience that was out there. And so in that sense, it really was. And in fact, I haven't seen it, but they did a revival of the play, and there's
Yes.
a film of that revival and just a few years ago. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, and it's also set in the 60s. It's not, they didn't try to make it contemporary.
Well,
So
you can't really, can you?
you can't translate it. And that's the thing about it. It's very much of its time. And that's what's fascinating about it.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned the China syndrome, which actually maybe people forget just how close in time that the release of that film was before the 3 Mile Island disaster.
Isn't that remarkable? It's like 3
Yeah.
months. It just coincided. It's amazing. And I think it was sort of good because that was a film that might have had hard going. I'm not even sure what kind of box office it did, but I think it was, Ben pointed out that it was really Michael Douglas that made it happen. So, I mean, it didn't have obvious sex appeal to Hollywood because it seemed like a kind of dry subject, but it doesn't come across as dry. I mean, there's a lot of technical information in it, but it never feels dry. It always feels there's a tremendous momentum in it.
And yeah, and I'm sure you know, people were expecting some sort of romance, maybe subplot between Jane Fonda.
Well, I made that point. I thought that here's a film
Oh.
that didn't feel like it had to have a love story. I mean, you have a moment, you don't have anything. I mean, Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas are sort of warring colleagues in a way. He's this stormy petrel cinematographer, and she wants to keep, he's an independent, he's a self-employed freelance, and she wants to keep her job with the television station. So they're at loggerheads a lot of the time because he wants to get this footage that they've taken of this accident that happened. He wants to get that out, and everybody else wants to suppress it. So it's the whole, you know, that this is an eternal story, the story of cover-up, the story of whistleblowers and cover-ups, and how hard it is to go against the corporate powers that be. And then Jack Lemmon is fantastic as the guy who runs the lab or the power plant.
Right.
And he's just, you know, he's one of the world's great warriors. And I said that because there's a moment where he and Jane Fonda meet. It's a lovely meeting in a bar where they sort of have this gingerly kind of conversation. He finally sort of feels that he can trust her, but it's all about the subject at hand, which is how to get this footage out. And so they're on the same page, but there's no romance there. I said the real love story is between Jack Lemmon and the plant, because it's his whole life, and you know, it's the most emotional storyline in it.
That's a great take on that. Speaking of the boys of the band, then you flash, I guess, forward 20 some years to Philadelphia, where
such
a real, in a way, old-fashioned tearjerker too.
Old-fashioned, and I think what made it I mean, you couldn't have, people might say, why didn't he have a gay playing? Well, first of all, no gay would have played that role. Most of them weren't out, especially if they were, you know, actors, they weren't out. And one of the things that made it so appealing to so many people was Tom Hanks, and it's just an incredible performance. Jonathan Demme really knows how to make a great mainstream film. Denzel Washington, in an early role, is fantastic as this lawyer. He's sort of an ambulance chasing lawyer who gradually, and a homophobe. I mean, he's this virulent homophobe.
Yes. Well, and Jason Robards in one of maybe his last role. I'm not sure.
I think just about, yeah, as the lawyer, head of the law firm. So yeah, all these great guys, and this wonderful Bruce Springsteen ballad that begins the film about Philadelphia, just heartbreaking. And it says something in it like, my clothes don't fit me no more. I mean, it's really upfront about, and then you see Hanks in an AIDS clinic, which is an actual AIDS clinic, because you see actual patients there, and the film doesn't say that's what it is, but you kind of, I mean, even if you don't know it, it just feels so authentic and so kind of heartrending.
So maybe if it didn't change Hollywood, it may have it helped inch it along quite a bit, you know, in terms of the impact of the film, and less of a stigma around homosexuality, around AIDS.
I think it has to. You have to think it did. I mean, there's no way of evaluating it.
With Tom Hanks, which is America's sweetheart, or America's.
Yeah, he's like the Jimmy Stewart of his time, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to see Jimmy Stewart in that role.
Oh my God. Wait, that's a bridge too far, I think. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I just thought of one thing I was going to say, which I said about the China syndrome. Speaking of the old stars, every time I saw Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas, I kept thinking of of their parents and how they could have played the two roles, Henry Fonda.
I didn't think of that, but that's right.
Yeah, I mean, they really could have played those two roles.
So it's right. That's an amazing. I'm surprised that never occurred to me that they were both the sons of maybe the biggest stars in Hollywood.
They're the biggest stars ever. Yeah.
Amazing. And I did skip over Children of a Lesser God, but you know, which I appreciated because it was also not so. It just was. I don't know. It comes from another adaptation, by the way, from another play. We talked about The Boys in the Band. This is another adaptation. I remember seeing Children of a Lesser God on Broadway in high school.
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
Yeah, I grew up in New York.
It was fairly austere, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm trying to think of who it was, who was in it. And I can't remember.
Well, the actress, I can't remember her name either. But
Marlene Matlin, she was in it, right? Yeah.
But I don't think so. I was a woman, an actress, a deaf actress. No, wait a minute. You might be right.
Yeah.
It was a deaf actress who inspired.
She had never done a film, but they took her from the Broadway play, and that was her first real role on screen. So I think
wait a minute. I'm not sure about that because the woman who, I can look for my notes, but the woman who was I can't even remember the name of the playwright right now. Do you have that in front of you?
Actually, no.
Okay, I've got it.
Yeah, go to your notes. That's fine.
Mark Medoff.
Mark Medoff, of course.
So Phyllis Frelick was a deaf actress who approached him and said, there are no parts for deaf actresses. Why don't you write one? So he did, in consultation with her and her husband, Robert Steinberg, who were the models for it. So I know that somebody spotted some really good actor, I forget who, Ben could tell you, spotted Marlene Matlin in a play in Chicago.
I see.
And said, you've got to get her. So I mean, I think you're probably right that she was in the play as well as the movie. I'm not sure, but definitely the movie was a breakout role for her.
Yeah, and it was good.
She was in the movie 2 years ago.
Yes,
Hoda as the mother.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. We're thinking you and I, Molly, we should do our own.
Yeah, we should.
You should be doing one of these shows, by the way, a podcast, because you have. I mean, I just get so much. Still, like an amazing. First of all, you're a font, of course, of experience and knowledge around film. You have such a context of all the, almost like the majority of modern cinema, you know, under your belt, but also just your enthusiasm and still shines through. I mean, you know, it's terrific. But again, just to remind people, TCM Reframe begins November 5th. And then I would imagine probably, I don't know how frequently they're showing the films. There's 16 of them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly, but we'll put that information of how to get the whole schedule, and of which 4 of those 16
I think we're doing 2 a night, but I'm not sure how far apart the nights are.
I see.
6.
And Kimberly Pierce is another person who's going to be talking about Larry Karaszewski. I hope I pronounced his name. I believe the screenwriter, and Donald Bogle and yourself will be all presenting films and talking to Ben, putting the films in context. and how they impacted the culture when they came out, fantastic. And you got, again, a new book coming out while I'm sorry, you shouldn't say it that. You're working
I'm working
on
a
a
memoir.
new, right? Well, maybe what'll be wonderful is when you are done with that sometime in the next year or so too. I don't know how long it takes you to write, but maybe you can come back on and we can talk about that.
That would be great fun. I'd love to do that.
Me too. I'm so
Okay.
glad we met.
Me too. Well, thank you. I'll look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All
Great
right.
talking to you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. Get some
Thanks.
coffee.
I will. And enjoy the foliage. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.